Hi, I'm Tikki Basu again from the new media section of the Indian Express, and I have with me Mr. Subhamoy Bhattacharjee, the Deputy Editor and the Head of Indian Express's business section. Subhamoy will be talking today about the all-round gloomy picture that we see in the Indian economy, and over the last 2 months, September and October, financial institutions and rating agencies have systematically downgraded the forecast for India. Moody's, a few figures first, Moody's from 6.2% to 6%, Morgan Stanley from 5.8% to 5.1%, S&P from 6.5% to 5.5%, Fitch from 6.5% to 6%, ADB from 7.7% to 5.6%, and recently IMF from 4.9%. Subhamoy, why?
Yeah, they weren't looking good to begin with, and now we've got a further downgrade. So that actually is looking rather difficult at this stage. And you know, the reason why it's looking a bit more difficult now is when these downgrades came along initially, we had presumed that the numbers were bad and they would be bad in tune with the general circumstance of this year. What is of particular worry now is that between then, say this was around May, June when the numbers started coming out, till now the numbers, the economic situation had certainly improved both locally as well as within India. In a sense, there were some correction measures that the ECB, the US Fed, and locally in the Indian government had been taking. Now, pursuant to that, if the numbers start looking even more wonky, then you realize that the situation is looking further and further. Difficulties are what they are basically looking at, that they are much more stretched out than what had been thought at the beginning of the year. That is what I take away from the numbers.
But obviously, reforms are finally taking place. So, are they enough, do you think, to reverse the trend?
That's a point, and that's a very good point indeed, because the reforms that the government can take are something which is limited by what it can do to immediately invigorate the markets. And when I mean markets, I don't mean just the stock market. You know, there are things like, for instance, if you look at the issues like the invigorating the economy, the buying power of the economy, then that's one thing. The other thing is to do a longer term thought through. So if you look at it, it's something like a medicine. You see a patient with a problem and you prescribe a set of short-term remedies, and then you look at the person's overall ability to survive or to do better with the short-term remedies, and then you give the vitamins and other structures to build up a system of prevention against future problems. That is what essentially you can also look at the economic course that has been given. The problem is that the longer-term measures are possibly easier to administer than the short-term measures, and that's because what is consistently known as the short-term measures are in India typically the most controversial ones, and that is where the problem comes in. That essentially that means we know that here's a patient which needs immediately these measures, and you need to start making that person take those medicines, but you can't take him down that path because of the inherent resistance that he's producing up. So in this case, it is the panoply of agents which are creating a problem. At one stage, with the corruption issues coming up, at other stages, you've got political opposition coming up.
Sure.
And because you can't do those, the longer term phenomena of bringing in changes through longer measures, I mean, you know, basically building up the economy's ability to be as an agent of change, those are therefore sitting in the background, and that is why the numbers are again starting to look wobbly. In fact, as the IMF say, that out of the S&P mentioned that India's changes in these numbers would depend on of the 4 that it identified, 3 depends on whether the government can remove the problems around the short-term problems. These are removing the fisc problem, taking care of the political problem, and taking care of the problems of the immediate economy.
But we do need more short-term problems. And do you think that the government has that confidence?
That's the point. We have a situation where if they want to do anything very major, then they have to take measures which frankly go beyond the present government's legislative ability. So let's look at it in terms of bringing in a bill like the pension. Now, what does a pension bill do? Essentially, the pension bill is outrageously simple. It is simply meant to address at one level government employees. The surprising thing is that the government employees have already moved to a pension sector in 2004. So all government employees are in the new pension scheme, whether we like it or not. The private sector people like you and me, we people are not going to be in this pension scheme because we have got what is called the EPFO, the Employees Provident Fund Organization.
Yeah.
Now, whether that is not going to be disturbed by this FDI bill or the PFRD bill. The third thing is the man on the street or the woman working in the construction as a construction laborer. Somebody is saying that I want to ensure that they get a pension, and to get them a pension, we need a pension regulator. The problem is, if we want to give them a pension regulator, that needs a bill to come out. And the objection therefore is so peculiar, because why should anyone say that these sectors or these people shouldn't get a regulator? That is about all there is to it. So the entire debate about foreign investment and others is entirely what you might call non-sequitur. They simply don't follow from the original logic. So coming to what you're saying about whether the government can push it through, it needs to be able to tell in these simple language that these are what is needed.
Okay.
And there is a problem of communication, because I'm not saying that you need, it's not about whether Manmohan Singh can talk. I mean, that's an issue that has been debated several times by Congress. But it's more about
whether he has a speechwriter.
Yes. The big problem is whether the government's communication channel with the economy is open. The last 2 years of corruption-driven problems have essentially snapped a lot of that communication channel. And that is where the problem is coming up. So no matter whatever they would try to say is coming short. That says somebody, you are trying to say something. It happens with children that somebody is saying, putting their hand in the ear and saying, I don't want to listen. Now, it's almost as close as that. And that is where the problem is coming along, that the communication between the government and the people at large have broken down. And when it was breaking down, the Congress party didn't pay notice as to why it was breaking down. Now, when it has got the right ideas and it's doing the work, it finds that that broken down communication system isn't carrying the message. And that's why the structural problem is becoming so difficult again.
Shubhamai, there will be one last question. Would you like to advise the government on how to better the investment climate?
And so many of them are giving so much of an advice, and it's a pretty risky thing to give. But you know what? Let's put it this way. There are only 5 ways in which investment comes into an economy. Through tourism, through remittances, through difference between export and import, through foreign investment, whether as an FDI or as an FII. Now, of these, we don't have much of tourism. We have remittances, which is good, but that does only a limited amount. We don't have excess of exports or imports, because that is a problem that we simply have in terms of the fact that we import much more oil than we produce. So we don't have an excess of exports. So we need to depend on FDI and FII. And that's as simple as that. If somebody has a better idea that why we should get money from some other place, which is another place from where we can get money, sure, that's a good suggestion to give. But there aren't anywhere in the world. These are the only 5 ways in which money can come into an economy. So why does the government want to get into this trouble? The economy that by saying at one stage when it started raising questions about growth and all those things. So today, right now, the way the government can get it on is to ensure that there is one thing it has done well. It is ensure that the tax system looks good. The Partha committee has done a good job. The other thing that it needs to do, and this is important in terms of clearing up the small nitty-gritties of investment clearances. People don't want the government to do too many big things at a time. You don't need the RBI's rate cut immediately. It may not happen. But what you need is for a file to move from point A to point B fastest. It gives an advantage of 50 to 60 basis point just by cutting down the number of months the decision gets pending. If those can be done, investments will flow in much faster and much more readily than it is currently possible, than it's currently happening.
Thank you, Shubhamoy, for that insightful analysis, and hope it has been of great use for our readers. And hereby we end another chapter of the Indian Express decoding news for our readers. Till the next month, stay tuned.